your book, it was one of the first, actually, I think it was the first book that I ever read that was specifically in the topic of sexual recovery. 2 or 3 months into my own recovery when I heard about the book.
Yeah.
Do you want to guess as to what is the part of the book that I have recalled over the years more than anything else?
Oh, well, the one I hear about more than anything else is the corned beef and cabbage story about
farting on a wooden church pew. That's it. That's it.
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 13, and it is called Special But Not Unique. And our guest is Nate Larkin. Here this morning with Bobby.
Hey, Greg.
How's it going?
Hey, Greg. It's going
That
great.
was very enthusiastic.
I was jumping in early.
Coming in hot.
I was ready.
Locked and loaded. Well, that's good because, you never want to start one of these lacking in energy.
That's right.
I'll tell you a quick story. Do you know who Adolph Rupp was?
Yes.
The
Kentucky
legendary
basketball coach?
Yes, legendary Kentucky basketball coach. The arena where the Wildcats play is named after him. And I heard a story about an interview that he gave years ago. And one of the sports writers was asking him, like, do you ever know at the beginning of a game whether or not it's going to go well? And he says, I totally do. I just watch the team when they're warming up. If they are banking shots off the back of the rim or hitting them off the backboard, I know we're going to be fine because they've got too much energy, but they can always pull back. If they're hitting the front of the rim or airballing during warm-up, I know it's going to be a long night. So you definitely were that was coming heavy off the back of the rim.
I'm ready.
So,
you can
yes.
pull me back, but
Put me in, coach. No, this is good. This is the first one of these we've done in a little bit.
Yeah, it is.
What have you been up to lately?
Well, speaking of coaching, soccer season started back up. I coach my youngest son. I got 3 boys, and I have actually used that illustration. I don't know if I heard it from you or from somebody else, but it's funny because I actually just told my assistant coach that's.
Well, I saw you smiling. I thought this isn't the first time Bobby's heard this.
Yeah. So that's kind of been one of the biggest things right now, and I'm training for a sprint triathlon. Haven't gotten the courage yet to do an Olympic one.
Well, I heard if you want to be an actual Olympic athlete, that you don't have to be very good at breakdancing to make the Australian team. I don't know if you saw.
Yeah.
Well, hey, the little clip that you heard right at the beginning of the episode, you may be scratching your head and thinking, why are you talking with Nate Larkin about farting in church? So if you have not read Samson and the Pirate Monks, which is a book that Nate published, there is a hilarious story about when he was a kid and he was in church and he had eaten corned beef and cabbage and his stomach started to rumble and he tried to hold it together, but he let out a fart and it resonated strong off of the wooden church pew that he was on. And when I was reading the book, it was very early in my recovery, and it was one of those times when I cried laughing so hard. Like, I don't usually laugh myself to tears, but like this story of Nate's farting in church it just owned me.
I can't tell you how many times as a kid, or even, let's be honest, even as an adult, where like I feel it coming on and I like sit there and like I'll hold it and I'm like so paranoid that something's going to come out. And in the middle of the sermon or something, it's just going to be this loud noise.
I've just got this feeling that has just come over me that we are either ingratiating ourselves or completely like isolating ourselves from like 50% of the people listening right now. Like half the people are like, I've never loved you more. And half are like looking for another podcast to listen to right now. If you are someone who does not like the use of the word fart, I sincerely apologize. And I hope that you'll stick with us because this is going to be a great episode. It's a conversation with one of my favorite people that I've ever met in the world of addiction and recovery. This is Nate Larkin, who is the founder of the Samson Society. And, Bobby and I both have stories connected to Nate that were very impactful in our early recovery.
Yeah. So his book is the reason I started recovery. I was over in East Asia serving as a missionary. If you've listened to the episode 2 of the podcast, you've heard my story. There was a guy who actually gave me that book, and he had no idea the depth I was struggling with at that time, and it blew me away because I began to realize I wasn't alone, and what I was going through was not just. It wasn't just about a lack of self-control. Like there was something deeper going on. And it also gave me hope because I realized all the accountability that I had tried to do earlier in my life. It showed me why it didn't work. When I was reading his book and saw the community that he had, guys who could open up and can be completely honest about everything that they were struggling with. Like that's when I realized I have never had that, and I want that so bad. And so I read that pre-recovery. Like that was probably the thing that got me into it. I was like, I have to find a group of guys that are like this. And so that's what led me to meet you. So I would have never met you if it wasn't for Nate's book.
Somebody like Nate who followed his heart, followed the Lord, did what he knew was the next right thing, and sharing his story in the form of this book, that affected you. It affected me. It was a part of making those connections and so many things and so many people. Like literally when you talk about Samson Society, we're talking about thousands of people who have been impacted by somebody being willing to share their story. Really encourage you to pay attention as Nate shares. I just ask him to go back and just be autobiographical. When he shared his story in the book, and as I've heard him share it like in person since then, I always hear so many things that sound almost identical to things that I was thinking and things that I was doing. And it just is so comforting to know every one of us is special, but really none of our experiences are unique. Nate is one of the most authentic, just put it all out there people that I've ever met, which is one of the advantages you have of surviving something that for a while felt unsurvivable. We really pray that you will be encouraged by his story, that you'll hear things that you resonate with, and that really will inspire you to bring somebody else into whatever you're going through. It feels safer and easier to isolate, but that's never what we were made for, and so it's never going to bring joy. Hopefully you'll experience some joy as you listen to this really fun, sometimes lighthearted, sometimes really serious conversation with one of my best recovery friends, Nate Larkin. Hope you enjoy it. Well, this is Nate Larkin we're talking to, guys. Nate, welcome.
Well, thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh,
Greg.
man.
It's time for us to catch up.
Not as much as I have. I was really, really grateful when you said yes. Also was really thankful to get to be a guest recently on the Pirate Monk podcast. And I hated that you weren't able to be on the conversation, but you were doing something pretty cool when that happened. You were up in Pennsylvania, I believe, doing a recording.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Series of recordings for church leaders and pastors, which will be released shortly. And it'll be available through Covenant Eyes and through the Samson Society and through Boulder Recovery and several other channels.
But I had a great conversation with Aaron. And it was great just last fall to get to meet him in person finally. The only time I had ever talked to him was on a call like this, like we're doing today. But yeah, it's just been so cool to keep up with you over the years. You were one of the first names that I ever heard when I was in my recovery. I don't remember if I was given a copy of your... No. I remember I was at a Lifeway Christian store, and which I don't think there are any anymore. I think everything that he was online.
No.
But I was in a Lifeway store, and I was walking through, and I looked, and the cover of the book caught my eye, and I picked it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is about what I'm going through right now. And so I bought it, and cried my eyes out laughing at the fart story. But then it got beyond that, and when you were really getting into your story of kind of your journey deep into the dark places of addiction and coming out, it's like, oh my gosh, this is just so familiar and so hopeful.
That must have been shortly before Lifeway was forced to pull the book. They had to pull the book at least in some markets.
Really?
Yeah, because it contains nothing to do with porn, hookers, nothing like that. It contains a 2-page defense of the moderate use of alcohol. And a Southern Baptist preacher in South Carolina got his panties in the wad over that. Boy, he really got upset.
Let's keep our priorities straight.
And the irony is, since then, I've quit drinking. So,
but the lesson is we're okay hearing about your expeditions with prostitutes as long as you were stone cold sober.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Man, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and the defense of drinking.
You can still get the book from Lifeway. You could order it. They'd give it to you under the, in a paper bag. It just wasn't going to be on the shelf.
Well, I can imagine though how important it was to have that defense, knowing what the meeting after the meeting in those early Samson days looked like. Because I've come to
we went to a pub.
I've come to know and appreciate and love McCreary's myself whenever I get up to Franklin. So that's where it was, wasn't it? Did y'all go hang at McCreary's?
Absolutely, still is.
Yeah.
And we've started. I have moved from Franklin, Tennessee, which is where I was living when we started Samson, 2004. I'm in a little town about an hour south. We started a meeting in Columbia, which is the next sizable town south of Nashville, and we meet now in a barbershop on the square downtown. And right around the corner, McCreary's has opened their second location.
Come on!
So, I kid you not. So we could still go to the meeting after the meeting at McCreary's.
Very cool. Well, hey, we're talking about Samson a lot. And I imagine that a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast already know what Samson is or Samson Society, but there are going to be some who don't. And I know that that's going to come up as we're talking. But I'd just love for you to maybe take a minute, maybe start off by answering a question that I like to ask at the beginning or near the beginning. We've been talking a few minutes now of all these conversations, and just ask you, before I ask you to start sharing your story, Nate, what do you really want out of the rest of the time that we're talking today?
My big motivation for doing this was I wanted to reconnect with you and catch up, right? Have a conversation. And I am always encouraged talking with other folks who've been on this road for a while. When we reemphasize and remind ourselves of the central themes, because what I know about myself is this: I have a great forgetter. My recovery has a very high, evaporation rate, unless I am replenishing it, reminding myself. There's something beautifully liturgical about having these ongoing conversations. Whenever I get a chance to bring a new guy aboard in a newcomer meeting, whenever I get to tell my story again, it drives this truth a little deeper. So that's so cool. That's why I'm doing it.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah. I know I've heard your story, and I love every time I hear it. The first time I heard of your story, it was actually the I Am Second video that you did. And that was probably around the same time that your book, Samson and the Pirate Monks, came out, right?
Yep.
So help people get to know maybe Saint Nate, real Nate, all those Nates.
I talked about that in the book, kind of these personas that I developed early on and throughout life in order to find acceptance and find safety. So I grew up in a Christian home, a rigidly pietistic, holiness-centered Christian home. And my dad was a preacher, so I grew up in church 3 times a week at least. When the door was open, we were there. That was our world. And I turned out I had some talent for that world. I wasn't quite as talented, when we went to school. I wasn't athletic. I wasn't big. I was always small for my age. I was nearsighted, and my parents really felt it absolutely necessary that Christians be separate from the world, distinct from the world in all respects, including the way they dress.
Wow.
Right? We are a peculiar people. So I was socially isolated in school. I could do the things I was very good at. I was good at academics, so I could always excel there. And I had enough of a personality and a persona that I could get myself elected to positions of class leadership. So, for example, by the time I got to high school, I was president of the class and president of the student council and, head of the band and that kind of stuff. But I didn't have friends. There is kind of this, this crazy thing where I was well known, but nobody knew me. Now, my classmates' nickname for me, that I at least heard it behind my back, was Saint Nate. And I always felt good about that. That was proof, every time I heard it, proof that I was being a good witness. And that, after all, was what was drilled into me week after week, was my primary responsibility as a Christian. Never do anything that would bring shame upon the name of Jesus. So I had this squeaky clean persona that got me respect at church and admiration and attention. I was marked for ministry from a very early age. And it set me up so that by the time I got into, adolescence and puberty hit like a freight train with all kinds of surprises, nobody had warned me that porn even existed, so that when and we'd never talked about it and never would, that in itself sent the very strong message, this is not something we can talk about. So by high school, I was already well aware of the fact that I was not always the same person, right? So there was home Nate, there was church Nate, there was school Nate, and then there was all alone Nate, right? And I was sure that Saint Nate is the one that God loves. That was the person. I just had to find a way to be Saint Nate all the time. And the problem is I couldn't pull that off for any stretch. I could do it in church. I could do it in front of an audience. I could do it. For 3 or 4 days after youth camp, I could do it. After one of my countless trips to the altar, many of them made without ever leaving the pew, I could do it then. But I just couldn't keep it up. And so always haunted by this lingering sense of failure. It intensified in college. In college, I kept up the behavior, but decided I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I just need to throw off this, the constraints of this puritanical upbringing. I need to join the modern world. I need sex education. What better place to get it than porn? And I just need to wait for God to send the perfect girl, because when she arrives and I get married,
problem
will be solved.
Yeah.
Right. Ignorant of the fact that by then, porn and masturbation had very much become my default distress management strategy. Whenever I was in distress, that's where I went for comfort, for reassurance. That's how I medicated everything. And I did meet the perfect girl, and we did get married the day I graduated from college. I wasn't going to wait another second. But as it turns out, I don't know if you know this, Greg, but marriage is stressful.
What?
Huh? Yeah.
You don't say.
So not long after the honeymoon was over, the problem reappeared. It got worse in seminary. It was in seminary that I was introduced to hardcore porn. It was at that point in my life that I graduated from the still images that I'd been using to moving images. But even those images, I was not aware of the fact that those moving images were far more powerful than the still images I'd been using.
Right.
They were stimulating this deeper part of my brain that cannot distinguish between actual experience and virtual experience, and completely bypassing and eventually overwhelming the higher portions of the brain where critical thinking takes place and moral judgments are made. So this was stimulating the same pleasure centers in the brain that cocaine does. It was gradually changing my brain in the same way that cocaine does. We know that now. We can see it on brain scan. All my wife could see was that I was becoming distant.
Yeah.
I was drifting away from her emotionally. She didn't know what was wrong. She thought it must be her. That seemed like a pretty good explanation to me. That's what I went with most of the time, to live with myself. Right. And then what I told myself was, you know what? Porn is my best defense against infidelity.
Jumping in for a second.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting the ludicrous narratives that we'll buy into just based on where we are at the time. Because I'm sure at the time, porn is going to protect me against cheating made all the sense in the world to you, right?
It did. And more than that, I was actually being considerate by not burdening my wife with all my sexual needs as I understood them.
Right.
At that point in my head, sex was as important as food and water.
Yeah.
More important than sleep.
Being experienced as an absolutely functional need, right? I mean, you may not in an argument say, well, I don't really believe that I need it, but our behavior shows that we absolutely, on some level, believe that we need it.
Yes, yes. And to ever to give it up, to renounce, even for a short period of time, would be depriving myself of something absolutely essential. Would make my wife, So, I mean, it was my teddy bear. It was my pacifier. It was how I frickin' functioned. And because my brain was always working to maintain homeostasis, right? I could never recapture the powerful response to my first exposure to pornography.
Yes.
My brain was, that pegged the meter. So my brain is always working to dampen those feelings, right? Which is why tolerance grows. So I've got to use more. I've got to find something harder, right? Eventually, my brain, always looking for patterns, is going to identify those times, places, and situations under which I'm likely to use. And at the first sign that I'm likely to use, my brain already releases the dampening chemicals.
Yeah.
The counter chemicals that are going to protect me from pegging the meter. So now I've got to use to get up to normal.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've got to use to function. Now, I could function, I would toggle in these crazy, I do believe that sexual acting out, at least for me and probably for most of us, is dissociative behavior. I really had to go away from myself to do it. But I learned to toggle between those two states.
Oh, same. I mean, I even had a different name that I gave myself when I was acting out. It was just necessary for kind of keeping those rooms in, the house of my life apart from each other.
And unaware of how much energy it takes to run two operating systems simultaneously in one brain.
Yeah.
And it got worse when, I was unaware that porn wasn't protecting me. It was grooming me. It was as though I was sitting in a simulator for an hour or more a day, sometimes much more. So that it took a few years, but then all of a sudden, one day, ironically, on a Christmas Eve, on my way to lead a candlelight service, when I offer, I pull over to offer a woman a ride out of the rain, boom, there it is. The programming kicks in. As soon as she propositions me, I have seen some version of that scenario countless times. And at that point, it's not a person anymore. It's an opportunity. And I flipped. And man, returning to consciousness after that, which is really kind of what it felt like coming up, right?
Yeah.
Waking up, and now I'm leading I'm leading a candlelight service for people I know and love. We're singing sacred songs, and I'm living now with just the rest of the hangover. I'm starting, awful. Thinking, as I had thought so many times before, finally I've hit bottom. This is it. I'm done. I'm not going to do this again. But even in saying that and even making that promise, I knew it wasn't true.
Well, I remember that about the book. It's been a while since I've read it, but I remember reading how you said, I knew it was going to happen again. And that is a thought that I distinctly remember having myself as I was driving away after the first time that my behavior had crossed the flesh barrier. Wondering how long it was going to be before it happened again.
Now I'm doomed.
Yeah.
I'm haunted.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I am ambivalent about it. There is a part of me that can't wait till the next time.
Not the true part of you, right? But the broken and the affected part.
Exactly, the deeply wounded part of
Yeah.
me. The very young part of me, I've come to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
very young part.
and I know that you've been so clear and just repetitive over the years of being so open with telling your story. I know that it came to a head, in a moment that you describe when Allie, your wife, confronted you. And that was a pretty big moment for you, right? Because this was years and years after that Christmas Eve, because
Sure. I had quit the ministry, driven from the ministry in shame and despair, never caught, but just quit out of self-preservation, had gone into business where I had the great misfortune to succeed. So now I got money, I got opportunity, I've got nobody looking over my shoulder. It went dark for a dozen years.
Mm-hmm.
So we forward now to 1998. We're now in the area of online video porn. We're still years away from streaming video, but you can download video now. We've got broadband. That's changed the game. I don't have to go looking for porn anymore. Porn comes looking for me.
Yeah.
So it was shortly after we had moved to Tennessee. I had a period of what I thought was, recovery. It was abstinence. I white-knuckled for a little while, the benefits of the geographic cure. But then as we started to run out of money, I started to get scared. And that's when I reached for the only fear medication I'd ever used. So it was late at night. Allie had fallen asleep. I slipped out of bed, went back into my office, fired up the computer, started to download porn. And I don't know how long I was there. Time disappeared. It always does when we're in that disassociated state, All I know is one moment I looked up and there was Allie. I hadn't even heard her come in. That was a tough night. But she forgave me that night, but it got tougher not many nights later when she found a condom on the floor in the bathroom that I couldn't quite explain. And that's when she sat me down on the edge of our bed and she said the words that saved my life. She said, "I'm done."
Yeah.
She said, "I still love you, but I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't respect you. And I don't think you can ever change." That's what gave me the gift of desperation, finally.
Whew.
Yeah. And I was fortunately, without knowing it, I'd moved to a place where there was help.
Because by this point, you were in Nashville, right?
I was in Nashville. And I was stunned when I went back to the internet to look for resources for sex addiction to find there were 12-step groups headquartered here. There were therapists. There were people to call.
Because Nashville's like the birthplace of SA, Sexaholics Anonymous.
There had not been anything for me in South Florida that I was aware of. I'd never been able to find help. Now there was help. And now it was, all right, how willing am I? Now that help is available.
Yeah.
How serious am I about going for it?
Well, what did you find to be the answer to that question for yourself? We'll be right back.
How have things gotten so out of control? How did something that didn't seem like such a big deal at first completely take over? Porn and sex addiction are destroying your life and killing your relationships. You know you can't keep going on like this, keeping secrets and telling lies. Something has to change. But how? Most men who struggle with unwanted or addictive sexual behavior have tried to fix it on their own. But sex addiction is powerful and complicated. Recovery is possible, but it isn't easy. It requires us to focus on more than just behavior. It requires us to look at our whole lives and the parts of our stories that contribute to addiction. If you're ready to find freedom, maybe it's time for you to get to the roots. The Roots Retreat is a 4-day therapeutic and spiritual intensive. You'll work with therapists and coaches who specialize in sex addiction and recovery. You'll learn how to take healthy ownership of your behavior. You'll discover how your life experiences set the stage for addiction to develop. You'll see how God factors into your struggle, and you'll learn effective tools for ongoing recovery after the retreat. If you're ready to stop trying what doesn't work, if you're ready to experience real hope, healing, and change, let's get to the roots.
Visit awakenrecovery.com/rootsretreat or click the Roots Retreat link in show notes.
You know what? It's a crazy thing. Allie was highly skeptical when I first started going to the meetings. I got very enthusiastic early on.
Mm-hmm.
Loved the pink cloud. I was selling recovery before I owned it. She was skeptical though. She'd seen me turn over a lot of new leaves. She was very skeptical that I would stick to this. And I will say this, I didn't stick to it. It stuck to me. It stuck to me, man.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit more. Because I think I know what you mean by it, but I want everybody to hear this.
Yeah. And I think it was not, that's not to say that I still don't have to push against resistance at times to make that phone call or go to that meeting. Mm-hmm. There's still a part of me that wishes I could do this on my own. Right? And I still have at times these flashes of euphoric recall where for a minute I really would love to go back to Egypt. Okay. But those are real, but those are rare. The truth is that I never leave a meeting or leave a phone call. Sorry, I went.
Yeah. And
the deepest needs of my heart are met in relationship. That's why I keep coming back. Because that's where the solution is. That's where the healing is. It is absolutely true. I have learned it's absolutely true that the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right now thinking to something you said a while ago. I was well known, but nobody knew me. And that reminds me of a line in, one of our friend Andy Gullahorn's songs, The Secret. He talking about the guy Charlie, who the song is about, surrounded by a wife and a family who knew everything about him except the truth. About me. When you got into that recovery community now, and it stuck to you, to me it seems like, for me that's what it was. It's like there is no being known like people meeting you when you're at your bottom. We think that we're all going to be just these low lives because that's what we think of ourselves. And yet just the rush of, for me, it was joy, Nate, to actually be able to just answer a question without thinking about how I need to answer it, just telling the truth for one of the first times.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I had to learn to tell the truth.
Yes.
I'm such a poser. I had to get sober actually in a group like the one I went to, where it was a 12-step group that wasn't a Christian group. Because my religious persona was so well developed. And I had ranking there. I had a master's degree in God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I can skip the first 3 steps, obviously.
Yeah, can I audit 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, that's right. Good golly.
We get brought down back to reality and humility.
So I would try, plus also, I would try to impress people early on. So my strategy, my goal when I come in, I'm going to set the land speed record for recovery.
Yep.
You will never have seen anybody recover as fast as this guy. Right.
I'm laughing because I had the exact same thought.
and I'm a quick study. I mastered the material quickly. I learned the vocabulary, and I wanted to impress my sponsors. So I would pose. It took me 2.5 years to experience sexual sobriety because it was my spiritual and intellectual arrogance that made it tough for me in the beginning.
Wow.
When I finally gave up and said, all right, I guess I have to join the human race. Yeah. I guess I've got to become just another bozo on the bus. I guess I've got to be as willing to accept help as I am to give help, ask for help, right?
Before you got to that point, did you, in those 2.5 years, experience like confusion? Like, how does this keep happening as on fire as I am and as amped up as I am? Why does this keep happening?
Certainly, because I still thought that I could think my way out of this.
Yeah.
As soon as I could master the secret information, whatever the secret information, I'm going to find the formula, whatever the formula is.
Yeah.
Once I understand it, and now I did not know that the decisions I was making were limbic decisions. Those decisions were made before I was aware they were being made.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was disconnected from my heart, from my emotions, from the, I didn't know what I was feeling most of the time. And since, my behavior, so I'm doing irrational things for non-rational reasons, trying to solve the problem by rational means.
Mm-hmm.
Always mystified. How did I do that? That was stupid. I can see clearly how stupid it was, until I could come to the place where I could start bringing all of myself into the light, the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and become connected to where I am, what I feel, where I am limbically, and begin to restore some communication between the deeper portions of the brain and this, prefrontal cortex.
Was that kind of the
communication
first part of your life, or the first season of your life, when you were experiencing that happening? Kind of that unity of those parts of yourself?
in my recovery, certainly. I mean, that's what recovery has been for me.
Yeah.
To become more a whole person.
Mm-hmm.
Because the message I got as a child very early on was, what you feel doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
All that matters is what you do.
Well, and that's really, I think that's such a common experience that's shared by people, not only in sexual recovery, but people who have found themselves stuck in various types of addiction and compulsive behaviors. Is they were taught either directly, either overtly or covertly, your feelings don't matter. It's not okay to express them. And one of the most tragic parts of that is the expression of feelings is a very connected thing for us to do. We express our feelings to another person, and that's how we let ourselves be known. And when we're told don't do that, then the implicit instruction is go internal and figure this out for yourself. And exactly. the horribly tragic thing is when we start to get that lesson taught to us, how old are we usually? 5, 6, 7 years old. We don't have the skill to know how to do that in a healthy way.
I'll tell you what, my father was actually proud of the fact, and referenced it often, that he gave me my first spanking when I was 8 days old.
Oh.
Because I wouldn't stop crying.
Oh, Nate.
Yeah. So, don't ask for what you need. Didn't happen. I didn't have any language.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you've got language, don't ask for what you need.
Yeah.
And nobody's really that interested anyway.
And so now, fast forwarding all of these years, you're finding a community where, you use the phrase ask for help. That's really, if there's a password to get into this this place, that's it, ask for help. And you were asking for help, and it was being responded to, right?
Yeah.
People were saying yes to that request.
Yes. Yeah. And not just with teaching, but with coaching.
Yeah.
And with company, and with compassion and empathy. God, it's I still had to fight against this shame-based desire and pride-based desire. I think shame and pride are opposite sides of the same coin. I think early on when I said that I wanted to be sexually sober, that really wasn't true. What I really wanted was to be morally self-sufficient, right? I really want to be able to do this on my own. But when I set aside that ambition, that desire, and just lean into what I was created for, which is relationship, and actually touch hearts with another person, so that for the moment I am not alone, but we are in shared experience. It's strange, is it not, how fulfilling that is?
Yeah.
And how then the compulsive impulse fades away.
Yeah. it's amazing, and it's also disorienting when it's new.
Yeah.
Being there for each other, and even, putting myself out there to depend on another person. This experience of interdependence is very contrary to how a lot of us are apprenticed to live our lives. The lesson is don't rely on anybody, be self-sufficient.
Right.
And when we fully learn how to isolate and take care of our own needs, a lot of us get pats on the back. But independence isn't how we were created to live. And, interdependence, when I first began to experience it, it was almost at the age of 40. And so start trying to learn a new skill at that age, and one that's so vulnerable wasn't really super easy. But for me, one of the reasons I was so thankful for how bad my addiction got is that by the time I did get exposed and started into recovery, some of, I think, the natural resistance that would have been there to dive in was gone, because I hated what my life had become so much. So that was really one of the gifts. But for people that maybe it hasn't cost them as much, it makes sense why there's a hesitation to really believe that pursuing community and pursuing interdependence is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. The Samson Society, which we started in 2004, and a desire to kind of recovery for the church, right? And to be able to integrate Christian experience with this amazing recovery experience. Samson Society is not a 12-step group, but we did borrow the practices and principles of 12-step recovery. We noticed that we knew that the first time Bill Wilson wrote the 12 steps, there were actually 6. They were expanded later. So we went to 7 stages. We noticed that nowhere in the 12 steps is a sponsor mentioned. And yet when we started going to 12-step recovery, the first thing I got was, if you want to get sober, you got to get a sponsor. That's kind of where this interdependence thing starts. So we incorporated that into the stages of what we call the path in the Samson Society. So stage 2 of the path says, I start attending meetings of the society, and from its members, I select a Silas. That's kind of our word for sponsor. A Silas, who we describe as a trustworthy traveling companion for this stretch of the road. To me, it was really important to have that language. It's very important to me as a Silas. So I have a Silas, and I'm a Silas now to, formally 5 guys, informally a few more. But this is not, some of these guys come in thinking that it's a mentoring relationship where I'm going to be there to provide instruction, and benefit all flows from me to them. The dependence, they can be dependent upon me. I'm going to be the fount of all wisdom, right? I'm going to be the mountain of strength for them as they begin. That is not a good way for me to think about my role. I have made the mistake of thinking that way. There was a time when I was Silas to 16 guys. I mean,
whoa,
that's 4 more than Jesus. That was insane. And I cannot, and it ended in relapse for me. Because at that point, I was still, that the help was all one way. These days, my relationships with the guys I'm a Silas to are we're mutually dependent. So
kind of more of a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, exactly. They keep me abreast of what's going on in their life day to day. This is not accountability. This is what Michael Cusick calls accessibility.
Yep.
Giving another guy real-time access to my life. So other guys are letting me know on a daily basis what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're doing, and what they're thinking of doing. And I'm doing the same with them. I have the great fortune to, I get to have deep conversations several times a day. And I get feedback from my guys on my life at the same time that I'm giving some feedback to them on theirs. And I've got their back. They've got my back. We're not alone.
Yeah. Can I go back for a second and just restate something that you said, that I don't want to get lost in this?
Yeah.
The three things that are often a part of these check-ins is what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking of doing. That's really good. I mean, you think about how often in our practices have we been used to being truly gut level honest about any, much less all three of those things.
Yeah, right.
Especially especially the third one. Because I don't know if this has been your experience, but in mine, as I've been walking with people, it tends to be a lot easier for people to check in after they've slipped or relapsed and just to say, hey, I did this and I'm kind of resetting. There's a lot more hesitation to check in with the, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Right? Because there's that part of us that you mentioned earlier that really wants to do the thing. And I know that if I check in that I'm thinking of doing this, then that's going to lower my chances of getting to do the thing. Right. Yeah. And so I just think that's such a critical thing to incorporate. And wow, what a beautiful expression of connected interdependence. Like, I'm going to give you access to my thoughts and not only my actions.
Yeah.
I got another question for you. You started your recovery more than 20 years ago, right?
Yes.
I started mine 15 years ago. You mentioned that you have a great forgetter. I remember the first time you and I ever talked, and it was in October of 2009. I was sitting in Lamarck, Texas with my friend Chad Barrett, who had set up an interview with you. Do you remember that?
I don't know where I was. I was on the phone walking around someplace doing this interview. I don't remember where I was, but I remember the conversation.
Yes. Well, and that was the first.
I remember I was talking to Chad and
that was me. I was sitting there with him, and Chad was a friend that I had in Bible college. His father, Don, was the pastor of the first church where I was on staff. And Nate, I'll just, as a quick aside, tell you this. Yeah. In my story, everything hit the fan in January of 2009. In the fall of 1996, I came this close to telling Don Barrett, Chad's father, everything I was struggling with, which at the time was quote unquote just porn, right? I hadn't done more than that. Yeah. And those words got stuck in my throat and I swallowed them back down and I didn't say anything. And then the next 12 and a half years happened. But Don is a wonderful man. He would have been a safe person to have confessed to. I was just too afraid. He raised a great son in Chad and his other son, Michael, and his daughter, Melanie. But Chad was one of the first people to reach out to me after my fan day. And Chad actually came to Birmingham. He was living in Texas and made a trip to Birmingham. We sat down together and he just was just a really good friend to me, invited me to come down and speak to a group of men at his church in October. I mean, this is in the first year after my whole life blew up. And while we were there, I was talking to you on that phone call.
Oh, wow.
And it was so life-giving. And I just remember the passion and the clarity and the sharpness with which I was able to see everything, right? And I heard it in how you talked about it. Now here we are talking today, 15 years later, and you and I are what they call old timers, right? And when it comes to recovery. So what?
I'm a patriarch already. How did that happen?
I know, right? How do we battle against the great forgetter? I mean, how do we how do you seek to keep freshness, passion, enthusiasm, excitement, the way that recovery was in those early days when you first began to really get it?
I'll tell you, the greatest thing that I do to battle against my great forgetter is newcomer meetings.
Oh, yeah.
So the Samson Society has online meetings now, multiple meetings every day, meetings already in 7 languages. To get into the online meetings, you have to first do an orientation. Yeah, it's kind of a 2-way interview. We want to make sure you're a real person there for your own recovery. We want to let you know what Samson's about so you can make an informed decision, and we can too, whether we let you in the door and into the brotherhood. There's one every day, but Saturday is my day to do the newcomer meeting. And Saturday morning, I live for 9 o'clock Saturday morning. It's often a hard time just because I will hear, I've heard so many different versions of the same story. I get to sit in most of us do not decide to investigate recovery out of, just curiosity. It takes a crisis to get us there. Something that can knock down that wall of denial long enough for us to get through that window of opportunity to do something new.
Mm-hmm.
And that window closes quickly. What we've noticed is the guys have to sign up for a newcomer meeting. If they sign up for a meeting that happens that day or the following day, the odds are they're going to make it. If they sign up for a meeting that happens 3 days from now, the odds that they're going to make it are greatly diminished.
You
Right?
got to strike while the iron's hot.
You got 3 days for that inner addict to tell you that, no, you can do this. You can do this. It's not that bad. It's salvageable. So the guys that get into the meetings are typically, they're the guys, the pain is palpable.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to remember what it was like.
Yeah.
But then I also get to deliver some hope and some good news. And that I just love to do that. And I can tell guys in all sincerity that what feels like the worst day of your life can turn out to be the best. And we can't guarantee, for the married guys, we can't guarantee that your marriage will survive. Not every marriage does, but every man does. And for those marriages that do survive, they don't just survive, they thrive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm convinced that those newcomer meetings, and also I love it when my phone rings and there's somebody local who's ready, and if somebody says, hey, can you, I get a phone call that somebody has just hit the wall.
Mm-hmm.
They're ready. I'm going to move heaven and earth to get with them as soon as possible.
How many coffee shop meetings have you had over the years, Nate?
At this point, there's been thousands.
Yeah. I know personally at least 4 or 5 men in Nashville or Franklin, and somebody gave them your number and they called you, and to their surprise, you picked up. And in some cases, like 45 minutes later, they're sitting at a Starbucks with you or at Frothy Monkey or, some coffee shop. And just, and having you sitting across saying, hey, let me go first. And just making it easier for them. And golly, I mean, what a gift you and I have come to know that is, to let somebody know that after all of that time of isolating, this is what bringing your stuff to another person and having it be safe could feel like.
Exactly.
What a gift. Now, you said that you have a lot of opportunities every day to connect with people through phone calls, through real and deeper conversations. But for somebody who's listening who doesn't have any of that right now, and for whom the thought of that would be absolutely overwhelming, somebody who's at square one, who's just starting to flirt with the idea of coming out of isolation, what would be like something they can hold on to, and after they finish listening to this episode, they want to do something right now to pursue interdependence or community? What would be a great first thing for them to do?
Register for a meeting. Find out where Awaken is. If you're close to Awaken, get yourself, find out where the meeting is and get yourself to the next meeting. Check to the Samson Society site, see if there's a Samson meeting. Even if there's not a local meeting, you can sign up for an online meeting. You can get to an online meeting that day or the next day at the very latest. And what you'll find is you are special, but you are not unique. You're not the freak that it feels like you are and that you're being told that you are. That the situation probably is more dire than you have wanted to believe, but there is far more hope than you dared believe there might be. And I tell guys, man, if you're an addict, you've got the golden ticket to a new life.
Yeah.
That's the price of admission.
And if your thing's not sexual, I mean, take what you just said, translate that to AA or NA or, something where you can find support from people who get it.
Right. Yeah. And Samson, by the way, is not just for porn and sex.
That's right.
So
That's right.
We got guys who come for all kinds of things.
Yeah. Awaken is more specific than Samson is. So that's a great thing to remind people of. Yeah. And if you're blessed to be a part of a church that's paying attention to addiction and recovery options, and you can find someone that is going to, steward your story well, then man, rise up and call yourself blessed to have that.
Yeah.
I know that we're seeing
Celebrate recovery is often an option.
Yeah. Regen, Celebrate Recovery. There's options that churches offer. So many of us who had a different upbringing in the church may not even know that anybody could put out a different message than what we were used to. So it's helpful to know that that's out there too, in much greater supply than when you and I got started, huh?
Oh man, yeah.
Nate, I'm so thankful. I think that the things you've talked about today are going to resonate with our listeners even more than an old wooden church pew. It's I've heard you say a lot of these things several times, and I can't listen to it enough. I mean, it's wonderful because it's true and it's for everybody. And so I really appreciate you taking some time to catch up and just share these hopeful words for people who are listening.
Thanks, Greg. It's been a joy.
I love you, brother.
Love you too. I'll see you down the road.
We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, feedback, topics you'd like to hear us talk about on the show, click the Send Us a Message link in the show notes of any episode.